Did you know that one of the greatest cities the world has ever known was built not just with bricks and mortar, but with a dream and an astrological chart? Imagine hiring the world's best astronomers just to decide what day to break ground on a new construction project. It sounds like something a modern billionaire might do for their Mars colony, except this happened over 1,000 years ago. Before you get too comfortable, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel to encourage me to make more content like this. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights and let's begin tonight's journey. You are standing on a flat, sun-baked plain. The air is warm and heavy with the smell of dust and dry grass. To your side, the great Tigris River flows slowly. Its waters are muddy brown but shimmering under the Mesopotamian sun. There is nothing here but vast, empty space, a blank canvas of earth and sky. You are here in the year 762. The man standing beside you, gazing at this emptiness with an unnerving intensity, is the Caliph al-Mansur, the second ruler of the new Abbasid dynasty. He isn't seeing an empty plain. He sees a future. He sees the center of the world. His previous capital was unstable, too prone to rebellion and old loyalties. He needs a new heart for his empire, a place built by him, for him, and for the dynasty he intends to last for centuries. You can almost feel the weight of his decision as he points a finger toward the west bank of the river. This is the spot. It's a strategic location, nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates, with access to ancient canal systems and trade routes. It's defensible, fertile, and most importantly, it's a clean slate. You watch as architects unroll their plans, revealing a design so bold it seems almost impossible. A perfect circle, a city built in a round shape, something the world had not seen on this scale. It was to be called Madinat al-Salam, the city of peace. We know it today as Baghdad. Al-Mansur was a meticulous planner. He didn't just pick a spot and start digging. He assembled a team of the best minds, including his trusted astrologers, a Persian named Norbakht and a Jewish scholar named Mashbla. Their job was to gaze at the stars and find the single most perfect, most auspicious moment in all of history to lay the first brick. They declared that late July, under the sign of Leo, promised greatness and longevity. And so, on that very specific day, thousands of workers, architects, and craftsmen from across the empire gathered. You can hear the low murmur of 100 different dialects as they await the signal. This wasn't just construction, it was a cosmic event. The design itself was a marvel of urban planning, for massive gates were set into the outer walls, pointing to the four corners of the empire: Kufa, Basra, Khorasan, and Syria. It was a clear message: all roads lead here. Inside the concentric walls, the city was organized with geometric precision. At the very center, a vast open space was left for the Caliph's palace, the Golden Gate Palace, and the Grand Mosque. It was a physical representation of his power, with all of society revolving around him. Historians still debate whether this circular design was purely a defensive masterstroke, creating a fortress with no weak corners, or if it was a profound symbolic gesture, representing the Abbasid Caliph as the pole star round which the universe revolved. Perhaps it was both. As you stand there, watching the first lines being drawn in the dirt, you feel a palpable sense of creation. You are witnessing the birth of a legend, a city that would soon become the world's beacon of learning, culture, and science, all born from one man's vision on an empty riverbank. The city rises around you, no longer a dream on a dusty plain, but a bustling metropolis. The initial perfect circle is now overflowing with markets, homes, and gardens. The scent of spices and perfumes mixes with the smell of baking bread and the distant Tigris. But Baghdad's true foundation isn't its sun-baked bricks or its towering minarets. It's something far more precious and far less tangible. It is knowledge. And at the heart of this intellectual empire, a new institution is taking shape. a place that will change the course of human history. You find yourself walking through the palace grounds, past guards in polished armor and courtiers in flowing silks, towards a building that seems to hum with a quiet energy. This is the Bayt al-Hikma, the House of Wisdom. At first, it was a more modest affair, a private library started by Caliph al-Mansur himself, the same man who dreamed the city into existence. He collected manuscripts from his conquests, a treasure trove of Persian literature and administrative texts. His successors continued the tradition, but it was under the legendary Harun al-Rashid, the Caliph you might remember from the tales of 1001 Nights, that it truly began to flourish. And then, under his son Al-Mun, it exploded. Al-Mun was not just a patron of knowledge, he was obsessed with it. A famous story tells of a dream he had, where he met and conversed with the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle himself. When he awoke, the dream had lit a fire in him, a relentless drive to acquire every last piece of ancient wisdom the world had to offer. You push open the grand carved doors of the House of Wisdom and step inside. The air is cool and smells of ink, parchment, and aging leather. Light streams in through high arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden stars. There are no loud noises here, only the soft rustle of turning pages, the scratching of reed pens on paper, and the low, respectful murmur of scholars debating in a dozen different languages. You see men with turbans and men with simple caps, men in the robes of Muslim scholars, Nestorian Christian priests, and Jewish doctors, all gathered around tables piled high with scrolls and codices. This place is a magnet for the greatest minds on earth. It is not just a library, it is an academy, a translation bureau, and a research institute all in one. You walk past a group of men huddled over a complex diagram of the heavens. In another corner, a translator painstakingly renders a Greek medical text from Syriac into Arabic, his brow furrowed in concentration. The value placed on this work is almost unimaginable to a modern mind. It is said that Ullman would sometimes pay translators the weight of their finished books in solid gold. Imagine a stack of books on a scale, with a pile of gold balancing it on the other side. That was the price of knowledge. This wasn't just a passion project, it was a state-sponsored mission of monumental scale. Emissaries were sent to the Byzantine Empire, to Persia, to India, with one command: bring back every book you can find on medicine, mathematics, philosophy, and astronomy. Historians still debate the precise organizational structure of the Bayt al-Hikma, whether it was a single, formal building as we imagine it, or a more loosely connected complex of libraries and workshops throughout the palace grounds. But what is not debated is its impact. This was the place where the scattered threads of human knowledge were being gathered, preserved, and woven into a brilliant new tapestry. You are still within the cool, quiet walls of the House of Wisdom. You focus your attention on one man, his shoulders hunched in concentration. Before him lie two books, open side by side. One is written in the elegant, looping script of Greek. The other is a blank page, waiting to be filled with the graceful curves of Arabic. The scholar, a man named Hanan ibn Ishaq, is a Nestorian Christian, a detail that might seem surprising but is essential to this story. He reads a line of Greek, then closes his eyes for a moment, not just translating the words, but tasting their meaning, searching for the perfect Arabic equivalent. This isn't a simple mechanical process, it is an act of intellectual alchemy. How do you translate a concept like Plato's forms, or a medical term from Galen, into a language and culture that has a different philosophical foundation? This is the central challenge, and the driving engine of the great translation movement. But how did all these precious books get here in the first place? They didn't simply appear, they were hunted. Al-Mun's dream of Aristotle sparked a multi-generational, empire-spanning treasure hunt for knowledge. You can imagine the caravans setting out from Baghdad, their saddlebags filled not with silks or spices, but with gold for a different kind of commerce. Emissaries, scholars, and spies traveled the known world. They journeyed to the ancient libraries of the Byzantine Empire, sometimes receiving priceless manuscripts as diplomatic gifts, other times buying them from struggling monasteries. They traveled the dusty roads of Persia, gathering Zoroastrian texts and royal histories. They even reached the Indus Valley, bringing back Indian mathematical and astronomical treatises. A widely known fact is their acquisition of Ptolemy's great astronomical work, the Megills. Once translated into Arabic, it became known as the Almagest, a title that was later adopted by Europeans, and it remained the single most important book on astronomy for the next 500 years. The work of men like Hunayn ibn Ishaq was astonishingly meticulous. He wasn't just a translator, he was a master philologist. One of the more eccentric but brilliant details of his process was his refusal to work from a single source. If he wanted to translate a work by the Greek physician Galen, he would send agents across the world to find every available copy of that manuscript. He would then lay them all out, comparing them line by line, correcting scribal errors, and compiling a single definitive Greek version before he even began to translate it into Syriac, and then into Arabic. This was a level of academic rigor that Europe wouldn't see for centuries. The process was often a team effort. Many of these Greek texts were first translated into Syriac, a language closely related to Aramaic and widely spoken by the Christian scholars of the Middle East, before being rendered into Arabic. This two-step process allowed for a greater degree of nuance and accuracy. Historians still debate the primary motivation behind this colossal undertaking. Was it a pure, enlightened love of knowledge for its own sake, an intellectual renaissance driven by curiosity? Or was it a more pragmatic state project, designed to acquire practical knowledge of medicine for the caliph's court, engineering for building projects, and mathematics for tax collection and logistics, giving the Abbasid Caliphate a definitive edge over its rivals? The truth, as it often is likely a combination of both. As you watch Hunayn complete a line of perfect Arabic script, you realize you are not just watching a translation, you are watching the preservation of human civilization. Without this frantic, obsessive, and brilliant scramble for knowledge, the works of Aristotle, Euclid, and Galen might have been lost forever, crumbling to dust in forgotten libraries. Here, in Baghdad, that ancient flame was being rescued, and it was about to burn brighter than ever before. Your journey through the House of Wisdom continues, but you move away from the translators and their stacks of Greek manuscripts. You are drawn toward a quieter corner, where a man sits not with ancient philosophy, but with numbers. He is Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, a Persian scholar whose name would soon be immortalized in a way he could never have imagined. He isn't just a mathematician, he is an astronomer, a geographer, and above all, a supreme problem solver. As you watch him, you see that he is not contemplating abstract, theoretical puzzles. He is wrestling with the messy, complicated, and very real problems of a thriving empire. Imagine you are a judge in 9th century Baghdad. A wealthy merchant has died, and his estate must be divided according to complex Islamic inheritance laws. He leaves behind 2 sons, 3 daughters, and a wife, and the Quran specifies the exact fraction each must receive. But he also had outstanding debts and several charitable pledges. How do you calculate this precisely and fairly? Or imagine you are an engineer tasked with digging a new canal. How do you calculate the volume of earth to be removed, or the precise slope needed for the water to flow? These were the daily challenges of the Abbasid Caliphate. Before Al-Khwarizmi, solving these problems involved a mishmash of different methods, often relying on cumbersome geometry or simple guesswork. He saw the need for a single, elegant, and universal system. You watch as he picks up his reed pen and begins to write. He is composing a book with a very practical title, The Compendious Book on Calculation by Completion and Balancing. It doesn't sound very exciting, but what he is creating is a new language, a way to take a tangled, real-world problem, translate it into a neat equation, and then solve it systematically. He introduces two revolutionary concepts, two simple moves that could solve a huge range of problems. The first he called algebra. This literally means restoring or completion. It's the process of eliminating negative quantities in an equation. Think of it like a set of scales. If one side has a debt, a negative weight, algebra is like adding the same amount of gold to both sides of the scale, cancelling the debt and keeping everything in balance. From this one word, algebra, the world would get the term algebra. The second move he called al-Muqabala, meaning balancing. This is the process of reducing positive terms by subtracting equal amounts from both sides of the equation. If both sides of your scale have a 5-pound weight you don't need, you can remove them both, and the scale remains perfectly balanced. With these two simple, powerful tools, a vast number of problems about inheritance, trade, and measurement could be solved efficiently and accurately for the first time. What's truly astounding is that Al-Khwarizmi did all of this without modern symbols. There was no X or Y. Every equation was written out in words, such as a square and 10 of its roots are equal to 39 dirhams. Beyond inventing a new field of mathematics, Al-Khwarizmi's work was also instrumental in popularizing a concept that had arrived from India, the Hindu numeral system, which included the revolutionary idea of zero. An eccentric but crucial fact is that this system, which you use every single day, made calculations infinitely easier than the clumsy Roman numerals used in Europe at the time. Try multiplying CXE by XLVII, and you'll appreciate the genius of the decimal system. In fact, Al-Khwarizmi's own name gave us another word we use constantly. The Latin translation of his name, Al-Khwarizmi, became the root for the word algorithm, a testament to his method of creating step-by-step procedures to solve problems. Historians still debate how much he drew from earlier Greek, Babylonian, and Indian sources, but it is undeniable that he was the one who synthesized these ideas into a coherent and practical discipline, effectively giving algebra its birth certificate. He created not just solutions, but a way of thinking that would shape the world for 1,000 years to come. You leave the quiet halls of mathematics and step back into the vibrant, noisy streets of Baghdad. The systematic logic of algebra fades, replaced by the chaotic symphony of life. You smell roasting meat, hear the cry of vendors and the braying of donkeys. In any great city, ancient or modern, this much life also means sickness and injury. For most of history, this was a private terror, a matter for families to handle behind closed doors with folk remedies and prayers. But here, in the heart of the Abbasid Empire, something profoundly different is taking root. You follow a stream of people, some walking with a limp, others being carried on litters, not to a temple or a shrine, but to a magnificent building set within its own peaceful gardens. It has high ceilings, large windows, and you can hear the gentle, calming sound of running water from a fountain in its central courtyard. This is Abimaristan, and it is arguably the world's first true hospital. Forget the dark, crowded, and often fatal hospices of medieval Europe. This place is not a repository for the dying. It is a secular institution dedicated to healing, built on scientific principles. As you step through the archway, the first thing you notice is the order. The air is clean, tinged with the scent of herbs, not sickness. The hospital is divided into separate wards, a system you would recognize instantly. There is a ward for internal medicine, another for surgery, one for setting broken bones, and even a dedicated ward for ophthalmology, treating the eye diseases so common in the dusty, sunny climate. And perhaps most revolutionary of all, there is a separate, isolated ward for those suffering from mental illnesses, who are treated not as demonically possessed, but as patients with a treatable condition. The most radical idea, however, is not the architecture or the organization. It's the fact that the care is free. It is open to everyone, man or woman, rich or poor, Muslim, Christian, or Jew. Your ability to pay is irrelevant. This was made possible by the Islamic tradition of the Waqf, charitable endowment where wealthy patrons would donate land and property, the income from which would fund the hospital's operations in perpetuity. A widely known fact is that upon being admitted, a patient's clothes and money were stored for safekeeping, and they were given clean hospital garments. When they were discharged, they were even given a small sum of money to help them get back on their feet before returning to work. This was a holistic vision of public health. You walk past a room where a master physician, a man like the great Al-Raz, or Rhazes as he was known in the West, is making his rounds. He is followed by a group of earnest young students, just as medical students are today. He examines a patient, asks questions, and then quizzes his students on their diagnosis. The Bimaristan was a teaching hospital, a place where medical knowledge was not just applied, but passed on and expanded. The eccentric curiosity of this system was its rigorous demand for professionalism. Before a doctor could practice in a city like Baghdad, he had to pass an examination administered by the Caliph's chief physician. They would be presented with a complex case and had to outline their proposed treatment. This was, in essence, the world's first system of medical licensing. Historians still debate the fundamental nature of these institutions. Were they primarily an expression of religious charity, a fulfillment of the Islamic duty to care for the sick, or were they also a pragmatic public health policy enacted by a sophisticated state that understood a healthy population was a productive one? The answer is almost certainly a blend of both. As you stand in the courtyard, listening to the fountain and the soft music being played in the convalescence ward, you realize that the knowledge from the House of Wisdom has found its most noble application here. The theories of Galen and Hippocrates, filtered through the brilliant minds of the Abbasid physicians, were being used to ease human suffering on a scale, and with a compassion the world had never seen. You leave the ordered compassion of the Bimaristan, your mind filled with the practical application of knowledge to heal the human body. Now, you find your focus shifting to a more fundamental question. How does the body, specifically the eye, perceive the world in the first place? For over 1,000 years, the answer had seemed settled, handed down from the greatest minds of antiquity like Euclid and Ptolemy. The theory was elegant, intuitive, and completely wrong. It was the idea of extramission, that your eyes worked like tiny lanterns, casting out invisible rays that touched objects, allowing you to see them. It's a very heroic, active way of seeing, almost like a superpower. But one man, a brilliant, difficult, and uncompromising genius, looked at this ancient theory and decided to put it to the test. His name was Ibn al-Haytham, known in the West as al-Haytham. Though he was born in Basra, his most famous work took place in Cairo, a testament to how the intellectual energy of this era was not confined to Baghdad alone. Ibn al-Haytham was a force of nature, a polymath who wrote on everything from mathematics to ethics. But his true passion was light. He was a man of immense confidence, which famously got him into trouble. An eccentric and perhaps life-saving story from his life involves the powerful and erratic Fatimid Caliph, al-Hakim. Ibn al-Haytham, hearing of the destructive annual floods of the Nile, boasted that he could build a dam and regulate the great river once and for all. Intrigued, the Caliph summoned him to Cairo and gave him all the resources he needed. But when Ibn al-Haytham arrived and saw the sheer, untamable scale of the Nile, he realized his plan was impossible. Fearing the wrath of the famously unstable Caliph, he did the only thing he could think of. He feigned madness until the Caliph's death years later, saving his own neck. It was during this period of feigned insanity, under a form of house arrest, that he conducted his most revolutionary work. You are with him now, not in a grand library, but in a small, dark room. The shutters are drawn tight, and heavy cloths have been stuffed into every crack, plunging the space into absolute blackness. The air is still and thick with the smell of dust. For a moment, you see nothing. Then, with a tiny tool, he makes a single, small, perfectly round hole in one of the shutters. A tiny beam of sunlight pierces the darkness, a brilliant spear of light that illuminates the dancing dust particles in its path. On the wall opposite the hole, a ghostly image appears. It is a perfect, full-color projection of the world outside. The palm trees in the courtyard, the minaret of a nearby mosque, but it is upside down. This simple, beautiful demonstration, the camera obscura or dark room, was the weapon that destroyed a 1,000-year-old theory. If sight was a ray leaving the eye, this image would be impossible. The inverted image proved, with irrefutable logic, that light travels in straight lines from the object, through the tiny aperture, and onto a surface. Vision wasn't something the eye projected outward, it was something the world projected inward. You are a passive receiver of light, not an active caster of rays. This was a profound shift in humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. But Ibn al-Haytham didn't stop there. He didn't just observe, he hypothesized, he tested, he measured, he conducted countless experiments with lenses, mirrors, and refraction, all meticulously documented in his monumental 7-volume book of optics. His methodical process of observation, hypothesis, experimentation, and verification was the very blueprint for the modern scientific method. Historians still debate whether his method was a direct, linear precursor to the European scientific method or one of several parallel developments, but his influence is undeniable. He gave us the first true understanding of how we see, but more importantly, he gave us a new way of seeing the truth itself. The darkness of that small room, pierced by a single beam of light, gives way to the infinite darkness of the night sky, pierced by a million points of light. You are now standing on a high, flat rooftop, or perhaps a dedicated tower built for a single purpose, to get closer to the heavens. The air is cool and dry, a welcome relief from the heat of the day. Around you are massive stone and brass instruments, silent giants pointing toward the stars. There is a sense of profound quiet here, a stillness that feels both scientific and sacred. You are in an observatory, one of the great astronomical centers that flourished across the Islamic world, from Baghdad to Samarkand and beyond. While Ibn al-Haytham looked inward to understand the light entering the eye, the men who work here look outward to understand the light coming from the cosmos. This obsession with the heavens was not just idle curiosity, it was deeply woven into the fabric of daily life and religious practice. A widely known and crucial driver of this science was the need for precision in Islamic worship. Muslims pray 5 times a day, at very specific times determined by the position of the sun, and they must pray facing a single, precise direction, the Qibla, which is the direction of the Kaaba in Mecca. From your home, this is simple, but how do you find that exact direction from a new city 1,000 miles away? It is a complex problem of spherical trigonometry. The solution was in the stars. Astronomers were, in essence, the providers of the spiritual GPS for the entire empire. They created vast tables and intricate maps that allowed any traveler or city planner to find their direction and know their prayer times with unerring accuracy. In your hands, you hold the quintessential tool of this age, an astrolabe. It is a beautiful object, a heavy disc of polished brass, covered in a web of intricate lines and elegant Arabic script. It feels cool and solid in your palms. This was the smartphone of its time, a handheld analog computer of astonishing versatility. With it, you could tell the time during the day by the sun's height, or at night by the stars. You could measure the height of a distant mountain. You could determine your own latitude. You could even cast a horoscope, for astrology and astronomy was still deeply intertwined. For the sailor navigating the Indian Ocean or the caravan master crossing the Sahara, the astrolabe was an indispensable tool for survival, a metal map to the universe. The observatories, however, took this to a grander scale. They were not just for individual use, but were massive, state-funded research institutions. At the famous Maraga Observatory in Persia, Astronomers built enormous instruments to achieve greater precision. Imagine a mural quadrant, a huge quarter circle made of stone, built into the very wall of the building, with a radius of over 40 meters. An observer would walk along its arc, sighting a star through an alidate, to measure its angle above the horizon with a precision previously unimaginable. An eccentric curiosity of their work is written across the night sky itself. When you look up and hear names like Betelgeuse from Yod Aliauza, the Hand of the Giant, or Vega from Olwaki, the Falling Eagle, you are hearing the linguistic echoes of these very astronomers. They named the stars, and the names stuck. Historians still debate the extent to which these institutions were designed to correct the errors they were finding in the ancient Greek models of Ptolemy versus how much they were driven by the astrological demands of their patrons. But one thing is clear, they were not passive observers. They were actively testing, correcting, and refining humanity's model of the cosmos, making the heavens just a little less mysterious and a lot more mathematical. From the clean, mathematical precision of the observatory, your journey takes you down into the winding alleys of the city, to a workshop filled with a different kind of energy. The air here is thick with strange, acrid smells, the sharp temps of minerals, the pungent aroma of bubbling liquids, and a constant undercurrent of smoke from a gently glowing furnace in the corner. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with strangely shaped glass vessels, alembics, retorts, and crucibles, their surfaces stained with the residue of 1,000 experiments. This is the laboratory of an alchemist, a place where science, mysticism, and a fair bit of showmanship collide. You are in the world of Jabir ibn Hayyan, a man known to the later European alchemists as Geber, and a figure so legendary he is often called the father of chemistry. For centuries, alchemy had been a secretive and mystical art, obsessed with a single grand goal: the transmutation of base metals, like lead, into pure, perfect gold. This quest was wrapped in layers of symbolism and esoteric philosophy. But Jabir, and the school of thought he represents, began to approach this ancient art with a new and revolutionary mindset. He believed that the secrets of the material world could be unlocked, but not through magic or divine revelation alone. They had to be unlocked through hands-on, systematic experimentation. Takwin, he called it, the artificial creation of life and minerals through laboratory work. This was a radical departure. He was less interested in getting rich quick and more interested in understanding the fundamental principles of how matter was composed and how it could be changed. You watch as he carefully measures a quantity of a crystalline white powder, a salt. He documents the exact weight. Then he dissolves it in water, heats the solution, and crystallizes it again. He weighs the result. He repeats the process, using different methods of purification like sublimation, filtration, and distillation, all processes he helped to perfect and name. He is treating his work not as a magic spell, where you mix ingredients according to a secret recipe and hope for the best, but as a controlled, repeatable experiment. A widely known fact, and one of his most important contributions, was his insistence that all chemical knowledge must be based on practical experimentation. He famously wrote, "The first essential in chemistry is that you should perform practical work and conduct experiments. For he who performs not practical work nor makes experiments will never attain to the least degree of mastery." This was a direct challenge to the purely theoretical science inherited from the Greeks. Jabir's theoretical framework was still rooted in ancient ideas, like the Aristotelian elements of earth, air, fire, and water. But he added to it his own mercury-sulfur theory, the idea that all metals were formed from different combinations of these two principles. This was, of course, incorrect, but it was a crucial step toward a more systematic classification of substances. An eccentric but fascinating curiosity of his work was his obsession with a concept called the balance al-mizan. This wasn't just about weighing ingredients. It was a complex numerological and philosophical idea that every substance had a specific intrinsic balance based on its elemental qualities, and that by manipulating this balance through chemical processes, one could transform it. This quest led him to discover and synthesize for the first time numerous important acids, including nitric and sulfuric acid, which would become the workhorses of chemistry for the next millennium. Historians still debate the very existence of Jabir ibn Hayyan as a single historical figure. The vast and diverse body of work attributed to him, the Jabarian corpus, was likely the product of an entire school of anonymous chemists writing under his prestigious name over a century. Whether he was one man or many, the impact is the same. This school of thought dragged alchemy out of the mystical shadows and into the empirical light of the laboratory. They gave us new substances, new equipment, and a new vocabulary. But most importantly, they gave us a new method, a way of asking questions directly of the material world and listening patiently for its answers. They may not have found the philosopher's stone, but they laid the foundations for the entire science of chemistry. You leave the alchemist's smoky workshop, the scent of sulfur and strange acids still lingering in your senses. The quest to understand and transform matter is a secretive one, recorded in coded notes and complex diagrams. But what are those notes written on? You watch a scribe at his work, not in a grand library, but in a small, open-fronted shop in a bustling market. His reed pen glides across the surface, leaving a trail of elegant black ink. You look closer at the material he is writing on. It is not the thick, creamy surface of parchment made from the painstakingly prepared skin of a sheep or goat, nor is it the brittle, cross-hatched texture of papyrus, a reed that could only be grown in the specific climate of Egypt. It is thin, flexible, and brilliantly white. It is paper, and this seemingly simple material is about to unleash a revolution as profound as any philosophical debate or mathematical breakthrough. To understand where it came from, you must travel back in time a few years, to the year 751, to a dusty, remote valley near the Talas River in modern-day Kyrgyzstan. Here, the expanding Abbasid Caliphate clashed with the armies of China's Tang dynasty in a pivotal battle. This is a widely known historical event, the Battle of Talos. The Abbasids were victorious, and among the prisoners of war they brought back to the great city of Samarkand were a number of Chinese artisans. Some of these men possessed a secret that was, at the time, far more valuable than gold or military intelligence. They knew how to make paper. Before this moment, papermaking was a closely guarded Chinese monopoly for over 600 years. Now, the secret was out. The first paper mill outside of China was established in Samarkand, and the technology spread like wildfire across the Islamic world. Why was it so revolutionary? The answer lies in the raw materials. Parchment was incredibly expensive. A single copy of a large book might require the skins of an entire flock of sheep. Papyrus was fragile and couldn't be produced in the climates of Persia or Syria. But paper could be made from old linen rags, hemp, and other cheap plant fibers. It was a technology of recycling and mass production. You can imagine the scene at a paper mill outside Baghdad, powered by a water wheel on a canal. The rhythmic pounding of giant water-driven hammers mashing linen pulp in huge vats. The skilled workers dipping their screens into the slurry, lifting out a thin, perfect sheet and pressing it dry. It was an industrial process, capable of producing a vast quantity of writing material at a fraction of the cost of the alternatives. This abundance of cheap, high-quality paper changed everything. The work of the translators in the House of Wisdom could now be copied and disseminated on an unprecedented scale. Books, once the exclusive luxury of kings and the ultra-wealthy, became accessible to a much wider audience of scholars, students, and merchants. This created an entire new economy. You are now walking through Baghdad's Souk al-Warakin, the paper sellers market. It is a street with over 100 shops dedicated to books and stationery. You see booksellers hawking the latest works of poetry, stacks of freshly copied scientific treatises, and students eagerly browsing for affordable textbooks. An eccentric but crucial quality of this new paper was its security. Unlike parchment, which could be scraped clean and reused or altered, the fibrous nature of paper meant that ink soaked into it. Any attempt to erase a word would smudge the fibers and be immediately obvious. This made it the perfect medium for contracts and official government records, fueling a boom in bureaucracy. Historians still debate how quickly paper completely replaced parchment for all uses. For high-status projects, like master copies of the Quran, the traditional prestige of parchment was often preferred for centuries. But for the daily work of science, commerce, and government, paper was the undisputed king. It was the physical medium that allowed the Golden Age to think, to argue, to govern, and to remember. The paper revolution you witnessed was not just about accounting and record-keeping. It was about thought itself. A cheap and plentiful medium means that ideas, especially complex and dangerous ones, can travel faster and farther than ever before. You are now in a quiet, walled garden, away from the clamor of the markets. The moon hangs high and full in the sky, casting a soft, silver light on the tiled pathways and the dark leaves of the jasmine bushes. The air is fragrant and cool. In the center of the garden, a small group of men are seated on plush carpets, their faces illuminated by the gentle glow of a single oil lamp. A servant moves silently, refilling small cups with sweet tea. This is not a business meeting or a casual gathering. It is a debate, a wrestling match of the mind. And the stakes are nothing less than the nature of God, the universe, and man's place within it. At the center of the discussion is a man named Al-Khwarizmi. He is a towering intellect, known as the philosopher of the Arabs, because he was one of the very first to take the translated works of the ancient Greeks, particularly Aristotle and Plato, and try to build a bridge between their world of pure reason and the world of Islamic revelation. For Al-Khwarizmi, there was no fundamental conflict. He argued passionately that philosophy and prophecy were two different paths leading to the same ultimate truth. He believed that the Quran and the universe were two books written by the same author, God, and so they could not possibly contradict each other. If they appeared to, it simply meant that your understanding was incomplete. You listen as he patiently explains a point, using logic as sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. His mind was not confined to a single discipline. He wrote over 200 works on everything from medicine and music to optics and meteorology. An eccentric but telling curiosity about him is that Al-Khwarizmi is also credited as one of the pioneers of cryptography. He wrote a treatise called a manuscript on deciphering cryptographic messages, which outlined the method of frequency analysis, the very technique that would remain the cornerstone of code breaking for 1,000 years. For him, this was not a separate hobby, it was all part of the same quest. He saw the universe as a rational, ordered system, a divine message written in the language of mathematics. And just like a coded message, it could be deciphered with the tools of logic. But not everyone in the garden is convinced. This attempt to harmonize Greek philosophy, or falsafa, with Islamic theology was a deeply controversial project. A more conservative scholar raises an objection. What about Aristotle's claim that the universe is eternal, that it was never created and will never end? How can this possibly be reconciled with the Quran's clear statement that God created the world from nothing? You can feel the tension in the cool night air. This is the central conflict of the age. The philosophers, the Falasifa, were often seen with suspicion by more orthodox theologians. The Mutakalimun, who feared that this reliance on human reason could lead believers away from the pure, revealed truth of the faith. Historians still debate the true extent of this tension, whether these were formal, opposing schools of thought, or simply a spectrum of intellectual positions. What is certain is that these were not idle, academic questions. They were passionate, deeply felt arguments about the right way to understand reality. As the debate continues under the moonlight, another great mind, Al-Farabi, would soon take up Al-Kindi's mantle, further deepening the synthesis and earning the title of the second teacher, with Aristotle himself being the first. These moonlit debates, now copied and spread on cheap paper, were shaping the intellectual soul of an entire civilization. The rigorous logic of the philosopher's garden fades, like a dream upon waking. The search for ultimate truth can be an exhausting one, and sometimes the soul craves not a syllogism, but a story. You find yourself in a different kind of gathering now, no less refined, but filled with a different kind of anticipation. You are in the grand reception hall of a wealthy Baghdad merchant. The air is warm and hazy with the sweet, woody scent of burning oud wood. You recline on plush silk cushions, a small plate of dates and pistachios by your side. The room is softly lit by dozens of flickering oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the tiled walls. In the center of the room sits a man with a weathered face and eyes that seem to hold 1,000 secrets. He is a Hokawati, a professional storyteller, and tonight he is the most important man in the city. He does not begin with a grand pronouncement. He simply clears his throat, takes a sip of water, and begins to speak. His voice is a low, mesmerizing hum, and as he weaves his words, the room around you seems to melt away. He tells the tale of a powerful king, Shahryar, who, betrayed by his wife, vows to marry a new bride each day and have her executed the next morning. But then comes a woman of extraordinary courage and intelligence, the vizier's daughter, Shahrazad. She has a plan. On their wedding night, she begins to tell the king a story, a captivating tale of magic, jinns, and lands. As dawn approaches, she stops at the most exciting part, promising to finish the next night if he lets her live. The king, desperate to know what happens next, agrees, and so it begins. A story that stretches into 1,001 nights, a life saved by a cliffhanger. This framing story is the most widely known part of the collection we call 1001 Nights, or the Arabian Nights. What you are hearing is the 9th century equivalent of a binge-worthy television series, a new installment delivered each evening that keeps the entire city talking. The storyteller now launches into a tale of Sinbad the Sailor, a merchant from Basra, whose voyages take him to fantastical islands populated by giant birds and one-eyed monsters. As you listen, you realize these are not just fairy tales. They are a reflection of the world outside this room. Sinbad's constant talk of trade, of buying low in one port and selling high in another, mirrors the very real life of your host, a merchant whose fortunes depend on the great trade routes. The stories are filled with the sights and sounds of Abbasid Baghdad, its bustling markets, its grand palaces, its complex social etiquette. An eccentric but crucial fact about this collection is that it wasn't a single book written by a single author. It was a living, breathing thing, a snowball rolling through centuries and cultures. The oldest core was a Persian book called Hazar Afsan, or 1,000 Tales. When it arrived in Baghdad, Arab storytellers adopted it, Arabized the names, and began inserting their own stories, tales of the clever Caliph Harun ar-Rashid walking the streets in disguise, and local fables from Egypt and Syria. It was a cultural melting pot in literary form. Historians still debate how accurately these stories reflect Abbasid society. Are they a reliable window into the daily lives of the people, or are they a highly romanticized, exaggerated form of escapism, a fantasy of infinite wealth and magical solutions to life's problems? The truth is likely that they are both. They are a society's dream of itself, as the storyteller's voice trails off for the night, leaving a prince in mortal peril. You feel a pang of frustration and a deep sense of anticipation for tomorrow. You understand, viscerally, how Shahrazad survived. The storyteller's voice fades, leaving behind the ghosts of jinns and sailors in the warm, scented air. The world of imagination, conjured by words, gives way to a world of contemplation conjured by pure form. You find yourself standing in the vast, open courtyard of a great mosque. The sun is high, and the brilliant white marble under your feet reflects the light, making you squint. Before you is a massive archway, an Ewan, and its entire surface, along with the walls surrounding it, is covered in a breathtaking display of color and pattern. You are looking at a different kind of story, one told not with characters and plot, but with line, color, and rhythm. This is the visual language of the Golden Age. The first thing you notice is what is not there. There are no images of people, no portraits of the Caliph, no scenes from history, no depictions of animals or even angels. This absence is a deliberate and profound choice. In the religious art of this period, the depiction of living beings was strictly avoided, a tradition known as anachronism. This wasn't because the artists lacked the skill. You only need to look at secular books and palaces to see beautiful illustrations of courtly life. This was a theological principle. The act of creating a living form was seen as belonging to God alone. To create a picture of a man or an animal was to risk competing with the Creator, to flirt with the sin of idolatry. Art in a sacred space was not meant to be a window onto the world, but a mirror reflecting the underlying order and unity of the divine. Your eyes are drawn to the tilework, a mesmerizing, interlocking web of stars and polygons in shades of deep blue, turquoise, and white. This is Islamic geometric art, a visual expression of the mathematical genius you encountered in the House of Wisdom. The patterns seem to expand in every direction, suggesting a perfection that could continue into infinity. There are no loose ends, no single point of focus. Your eye cannot rest. It is encouraged to wander, to follow the lines as they weave over and under each other in a perfect, logical, and yet dizzyingly complex dance. It feels like looking at the blueprint of the cosmos. An eccentric and humbling fact about these masterpieces is that their creators often used the simplest of tools, a straight edge and a compass. With these two implements, they could generate every polygon and star needed to create patterns of almost unbelievable complexity, a testament to the power of pure geometry. Running along the top of the arch is a wide band that looks, from a distance, like an intricate border. But as you look closer, you see that it is writing. It is calligraphy, the art of beautiful handwriting, considered the highest and noblest art form of all. Here, the Arabic script, the very language of the Quranic revelation, is transformed into an object of veneration. The tall, vertical strokes of the Kufic script give it a monumental, architectural quality, while in other places, a more flowing, cursive script moves across the wall like a river of ink. It is both language to be read and a pattern to be admired, the divine word made visible and beautiful. Weaving between the geometric panels and the calligraphic borders are flowing, stylized patterns of vines, leaves, and stems. This is the arabesque. It is nature, but a perfected, idealized version of it. The vines don't grow chaotically. They follow a rhythmic, symmetrical, and endless logic, branching and spiraling in a way that echoes the infinite repetition of the geometric patterns. Historians still debate whether the tradition of anachronism was a direct command from the Quran, which is not explicit on the topic, or a cultural reaction against the figurative and icon-heavy art of the Byzantine Christian and Sassanid Persian empires that Islam displaced. Whatever its origin, the result was a unique visual language, a harmonious blend of mathematics, scripture, and idealized nature that turned buildings of brick and stone into spaces for profound spiritual reflection. The harmonious patterns of geometry and calligraphy that adorn the great mosques of the East are a silent, contemplative music for the eyes. But now, you must travel a great distance, across the entire breadth of North Africa, across the Straits of Gibraltar, to a place where actual music was being revolutionized. The center of gravity of our story shifts from Baghdad to the great rival city of Cordoba, the glittering capital of the Umayyad Caliphate of Al-Andalus, or Islamic Spain. Here, under the brilliant Andalusian sun, the cultural seeds planted in the East were blossoming into strange and beautiful new forms. And one man, more than any other, was the master gardener of this cultural paradise. You find yourself in the opulent court of the Emir Abdi al-Rahman II. The room is a marvel of Moorish architecture, with horseshoe arches and intricate plasterwork. The air is filled with a sound that is both familiar and yet somehow new. A musician sits on a low cushion, a pear-shaped stringed instrument resting in his lap. It is an oud, the ancestor of the European lute, and, eventually, the guitar. The musician's fingers dance across the strings with a speed and precision that is mesmerizing. His name is Abu al-Hasan Ali ibn Nafi, but everyone knows him by his nickname, Zirahab, a name given to him for his dark complexion and melodious voice, which reminded people of the song of the blackbird. Zirahab was a refugee, a political and artistic exile from Baghdad. He had been the star pupil of the most famous court musician in the Abbasid capital, but his prodigious talent had made his master jealous, forcing him to flee for his life. After a long journey, he arrived in Cordoba, a city eager to import the high culture of its great rival, Baghdad, and Zirahab brought it all. His most famous and widely known innovation was adding a fifth string to the oud. This might sound like a small, technical detail, but it was a musical revolution. It expanded the instrument's range and allowed for far more complex and emotionally resonant melodies. He also established what many consider to be the world's first conservatory, a formal school of music that taught a systematic curriculum, from vocal exercises to the complex theories of musical modes. But Zirahab's influence extended far beyond music. He became the undisputed arbiter of taste and style for the entire peninsula. He was the Anna Wintour of the 9th century. He dictated that one should change clothes according to the seasons, wearing light, white fabrics in the summer and dark, fur-lined garments in the winter. He introduced new, shorter hairstyles for men and women, replacing the old, long-parted styles. An eccentric and surprisingly modern curiosity of his influence was his focus on hygiene. He introduced an early form of toothpaste he had invented, popularized underarm deodorants, and advocated for bathing twice a day. He was, in essence, selling a lifestyle. Even the way people ate was transformed by him. Before Zirahab, a wealthy Andalusian meal was a chaotic affair, with all the dishes, sweet and savory, brought to the table at once. Zirahab introduced the elegant, structured, three-course meal that is now the standard across the Western world. You start with a soup or a light starter, move to a main course of fish or meat, and finish with a dessert of fruits and nuts. He even popularized the use of crystal drinking glasses, which had replaced the heavy gold and silver goblets of the past, so one could appreciate the color of the wine within. Historians still debate whether the legend of Zirahab has been exaggerated, whether he was a single, brilliant polymath, or if his name has become a convenient symbol for the wave of Eastern sophistication that swept over Al-Andalus. But whether man or legend, his impact was undeniable. He taught a continent not just what to listen to, but what to wear, how to smell, and even how to eat dinner. The revolutionary tastes introduced by Zirahab would have been impossible without a revolution in the land itself. The oranges and apricots in his desserts, the sugarcane that sweetened his drinks, these were not native to the arid Iberian Peninsula. You leave the refined atmosphere of the Cordoban court and step out into the sunshine. But you are not in the wild, dusty landscape you might expect. You are walking through a meticulously planned garden, a paradise on earth. The air, which should be hot and dry, is cool and moist, filled with the intoxicating scent of orange blossoms and roses. You hear a sound you now recognize as the defining music of Al-Andalus, not the oud, but the constant, gentle splashing and gurgling of water. It flows in narrow channels, called acequias, that run alongside the pathways, watering geometric flower beds, and disappearing under shady groves of fruit trees. This is no accident of nature. It is a masterpiece of engineering, a victory of human ingenuity over a harsh climate. For the engineers of the Islamic world, water was life, and they became the undisputed masters of managing it. Their knowledge was a collection of techniques gathered from across the world, from the Roman aqueducts to the ancient Persian qanats, which were remarkable underground tunnels that brought water from mountain aquifers to dry plains without any loss to evaporation. But they didn't just copy these techniques, they refined and expanded them on a massive scale. As you walk, you hear another sound, a constant, deep, groaning noise, the rhythmic creaking of wet wood. You follow the sound to the edge of the gardens where the great Guadalquivir River flows. There, you see it, a colossal wooden wheel, a noria, its circumference lined with clay pots. As the river's current pushes the wheel, it slowly turns, scooping up water, lifting it to the top of its arc, and tipping it into the mouth of an aqueduct that will carry it for miles to irrigate fields and supply the fountains and bathhouses of the city. This constant, groaning workhorse is the engine of this entire ecosystem. This mastery of water unleashed what historians call the Arab agricultural revolution. A widely known and transformative fact of this era was the introduction of dozens of new crops into the Mediterranean world from the farther reaches of the empire. From India and Persia came sugarcane, rice, hard wheat, oranges, lemons, limes, apricots, and spinach. This agricultural diffusion changed the diet, the landscape, and the economy of the entire region. Suddenly, farmers could get 2 or even 3 harvests a year from the same land, planting summer crops like rice that thrived in the heat, in fields that previously lay low. They used sophisticated techniques of crop rotation, fertilization, and pest control, all meticulously documented in detailed agricultural manuals. An eccentric but illustrative example of their scientific approach to farming was the creation of botanical gardens specifically for acclimatizing new plants. They wouldn't just throw seeds in the ground and hope for the best. They would carefully experiment to see which new crops could adapt to the local soil and climate, a process of careful, empirical testing that feels incredibly modern. Historians still debate whether the term revolution is accurate, as some argue it was a more gradual evolution and transmission of existing knowledge rather than a sudden event. But there is no debating the result. The once parched lands around cities like Cordoba and Valencia became some of the most productive agricultural regions in the world, capable of supporting huge urban populations. The lush gardens you are walking through are not just a luxury for the elite. They are a beautiful demonstration model of the same science that was feeding an empire. They are a physical expression of the belief that with knowledge, humanity could collaborate with nature to create an earthly paradise. You step away from the engineered paradise of the Andalusian gardens and into an engineered chaos of a different kind. You are in a vast covered marketplace, a souk or a bazaar, somewhere in a major commercial hub like Aleppo or Basra. The air is thick with 1,000 competing smells, the sweet perfume of saffron from Persia, the sharp tang of pepper from India, the earthy scent of leather from Morocco, and the ever-present odor of pack animals. The noise is a constant, overwhelming roar, 100 languages haggling over prices, the clatter of artisans' hammers, and the rhythmic chanting of merchants advertising their wares. This is the mighty economic engine that powers the entire Golden Age. The flow of ideas you have witnessed in libraries and observatories is built upon this, the relentless, globe-spanning flow of goods. Look around you. This is the end point and the starting point of a dozen different journeys. In one stall, you see bolts of shimmering silk that have traveled for a year in a camel caravan along the legendary Silk Road from China. In another, a merchant carefully weighs out cloves and nutmeg that have crossed the vast Indian Ocean in the hold of a dhow, guided by the monsoon winds and the stars. You see sacks of paper from Samarkand, chests of gleaming steel from Damascus, and fine ceramics that are a testament to a craft perfected by generations. From the north, down the great rivers of Russia, come amber, honey, and furs, brought by tall, bearded Vikings the Arabs called the Rus. From deep within Africa come caravans bearing gold, ivory, and salt. It is a world connected not by a single government, but by a shared thirst for commerce. But how does all of this wealth move? A merchant preparing a large caravan can't simply load a dozen chests with heavy gold dinars and silver dirhams. The roads are long, and bandits are a constant threat. The sheer weight of coin needed for large transactions is a logistical nightmare. The solution to this problem is a testament to the sophistication of this commercial network, and it is happening in a small, quiet office just off the main bazaar. You watch a merchant dip his pen in ink. He is not writing a poem or a philosophical treatise. He is writing a note, a simple promise to pay. This piece of paper, a sack, is an order drawn on his agent in another city. A widely known and truly revolutionary concept. The sack allows a merchant in Baghdad to pay for goods by giving the seller a note that can be cashed for gold at his business partner's office in Cairo, 1,000 miles away. This is the direct ancestor of our modern word check. It was a system built on an extensive network of trust, a shared legal framework based on Islamic commercial law, and a reputation that was worth more than gold itself. This system fostered other complex financial arrangements. An eccentric but common business practice was a form of partnership known as a kurad or mudaraba. Imagine a young, ambitious but penniless trader. He goes to a wealthy, retired merchant. The wealthy man provides the capital, a sack of silver coins, for a trading venture. The young man provides the labor, the risk, and the long, dangerous journey. When he returns, they split the profits according to a pre-arranged ratio. It was a form of venture capital that allowed for a massive expansion of trade, sharing the risk and the reward, and giving opportunities to those with talent but no inherited wealth. Historians still debate the primary driver of this economic explosion. Was it a top-down phenomenon, fueled by the Abbasid state's maintenance of a stable currency and safe trade routes? Or was it a bottom-up explosion of entrepreneurial energy from a rising merchant class, using these sophisticated contracts and networks? In truth, one could not have existed without the other. This humming, chaotic, and deeply interconnected marketplace was where the abstract value of knowledge was converted into the tangible wealth that funded the calligraphers, the doctors, and the astronomers. The vibrant, humming energy of the marketplace, with its seemingly infinite flow of goods and wealth, creates a powerful illusion of permanence and stability. It feels like this golden age, this perfect fusion of commerce, science, and art, could last forever. But now, you feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The foundations, which once seemed as solid as the earth itself, are beginning to show hairline cracks. The journey from this point forward is not one of new discoveries, but of a slow, creeping decline. You are no longer in the bustling heart of a unified empire, but on its fraying edges, where the threads of power are beginning to unravel. The first and most fundamental problem is political. The Abbasid Caliphate, at its height, was a vast, sprawling entity, stretching from the Atlantic to the borders of India. Holding such a massive and diverse territory, together with 9th century communication, technology was a near impossible task. A message sent from the Caliph in Baghdad to his governor in Spain could take months to arrive, by which time the situation on the ground could have changed completely. You can feel the immense strain of this geographic reality. Local governors, far from the central authority of the Caliph, began to see themselves less as servants and more as independent rulers. They still paid lip service to the Caliph, minting coins with his name and having him mentioned in Friday prayers. But in reality, they were building their own dynasties. You remember Cordoba, the glittering jewel of Al-Hikma? That was not a province of the Abbasid Empire. It was the capital of a rival caliphate, the Umayyads, who had never accepted Abbasid rule. In the 10th century, another powerful dynasty, the Fatimids, a Shia group, established their own caliphate in Egypt. with their new capital in Cairo. Suddenly, there were three caliphs, three commanders of the faithful, each claiming to be the true leader of the Islamic world. The unified political body of Islam was broken. This fragmentation was not just happening at the edges, it was happening at the very center. As the caliphs in Baghdad grew more interested in the luxurious life of the court and less in the day-to-day business of governing, they began to rely more and more on a professional, salaried army to maintain order. A widely known and fatal mistake was the decision to build this army not from Arabs or Persians, but from Turkic slave soldiers, known as Mamluks, imported from the steppes of Central Asia. These were formidable warriors, fiercely loyal to their commanders, but they had no deep-rooted loyalty to the caliph or the empire itself. In time, these military commanders realized that they were the ones with the real power. They became the kingmakers and often the king-breakers. The caliph, once the absolute ruler of the empire, became a powerless religious figurehead, a virtual prisoner in his own golden palace, while rival Turkic generals fought for control of the capital. Amid this political decay, a subtle intellectual shift also began to occur. The passionate, sometimes dangerous, embrace of Greek philosophy and pure rationalism that you saw in Al-Kandi's moonlit garden began to face a powerful backlash from more conservative religious scholars. Figures like the hugely influential theologian Al-Ghazali argued that while logic was a useful tool, an over-reliance on philosophy could lead to heresy. An eccentric but powerful metaphor he used was that philosophy was like a strong medicine, which could be beneficial in the hands of a skilled doctor but was a deadly poison in the hands of the ignorant. His writings encouraged a turn inward, toward mysticism and a more direct, spiritual experience of God, and away from what he saw as the arrogant and fruitless speculations of the philosophers. Historians still debate the impact of this closing of the gate of ijtihad, or independent reasoning. Was it a necessary course correction that preserved the spiritual heart of the faith, or did it stifle the very intellectual curiosity that had fueled the Golden Age? The cracks are no longer just hairline fractures. They are growing wider, and the once solid foundation is beginning to crumble from within. The internal cracks you witnessed, the political fragmentation and the slow hardening of intellectual arteries, were a sickness weakening the empire from within. But a sick body is also vulnerable to external shocks. For centuries, the great civilization of Islam had looked upon Europe, the land of the Franks, as a cold, damp, and largely irrelevant backwater, a land of illiterate warlords and primitive superstitions. The real action, the real wealth, the real threats were always in the East, in Persia, in India, and on the steppes of Central Asia. And so, when the first news of this new threat arrived, it was met not with panic, but with a kind of weary, arrogant disbelief. You are in the courtyard of a grand house in Damascus in the late 11th century. You listen as a merchant, recently returned from the northern port cities of Antioch and Tripoli, tells a strange tale. He speaks of a massive army of Frankish pilgrims, tens of thousands of them, men, women, and children, marching south. He describes them as fierce fighters but lacking in discipline, driven by a strange religious fervor. The local lords listening to this story are unimpressed. They have seen Frankish mercenaries before. They are good for a season of fighting, but they are not a real threat. Besides, the local lords are far too busy with their own squabbles. The Seljuk princes of Aleppo and Damascus fighting each other for control of Syria, to worry about a band of foreign fanatics. The great powers of the region, the Seljuk Sultanate in Baghdad and the Fatimid Caliphate in Cairo, see this not as an invasion, but as a potential opportunity.